2026 will not become the happiest year of your life by accident. Happiness is not a gift the future gives you. It is a consequence of inner alignment. The year changes only when the person who enters it is no longer divided against themselves. Most suffering comes from living a life that does not belong to you, wearing masks you forgot were masks, chasing desires that were planted by others. The first thing you must do is stop abandoning yourself. Pay attention to what drains you and what quietly gives you life. Every time you ignore your inner voice, you create conflict within. Every time you listen to it, even when it scares you, you begin to feel whole again. Wholeness is the soil where happiness grows. The second thing is to befriend your shadow. The parts of you that you hide, judge, or deny do not disappear. They wait, and they sabotage you from the dark. When you face them with honesty instead of fear, they transform from enemies into sources of strength. What you accept in yourself stops controlling you. What you reject will rule your life silently. The third thing is to let go of who you think you should be. Much of your anxiety comes from trying to live up to an image rather than living from your truth. When you release the need to impress, prove, or perform, something deeper takes over. You move with clarity instead of pressure. Peace replaces tension. Next, learn to sit with yourself in silence, not to escape the world, but to understand your inner patterns. The unconscious speaks softly. If your life is always noisy, you will never hear what is trying to guide you. Stillness is not empty. It is full of answers. Finally, take responsibility for your inner world. Not blame, not guilt, but responsibility. When you stop waiting for circumstances or people to change, you reclaim your power. Happiness is not the absence of problems. It is the presence of meaning. If you do these things, 2026 will not just feel happier. It will feel real. And for the first time, you won't be chasing happiness. You'll be living from it. Stopping the abandonment of your inner voice is not a dramatic act. It is a quiet and continuous decision made in ordinary moments when no one is watching. From an early age, you learn to look outward for approval, to measure yourself by reactions, praise, silence, or rejection. Slowly, almost invisibly, this trained you to distrust your own signals. What felt right was postponed. What felt wrong was tolerated. And over time, this created a split inside you. One part learned how to survive in the world, while another part learned how to stay unheard. Inner alignment begins the moment you recognize this split without condemning yourself for it. Your inner voice does not shout. It does not argue like the mind does. It appears as a subtle sense of resistance, a quiet pull, a feeling of contraction or expansion in your body. When you ignore it repeatedly, it does not disappear, it retreats. And when it retreats, you begin to feel empty, restless, or disconnected, even when life looks successful on the outside. This is not weakness. It is the psyche signaling that you are living from a borrowed center rather than your own. Choosing inner alignment over external approval requires courage because approval promises safety. It promises belonging. But approval is unstable because it depends on conditions that change with people, environments, and moods. When you organize your life around it, you become fragmented. You act one way here, another way there, constantly adjusting yourself to fit expectations. This constant self-adjustment slowly erodes your sense of identity, and happiness becomes impossible because there is no stable self to feel it. Inner alignment does not mean rejecting the world or becoming selfish. It means acting from a place where your actions, values, and inner truth are not in conflict. When alignment is present, even difficult choices feel clean. There may still be fear or loss, but there is no inner betrayal. The psyche relaxes when it knows you will not abandon it for comfort, status, or validation. External approval becomes addictive because it temporarily quiets inner doubt, but it also strengthens it. Each time you choose approval over authenticity, you reinforce the belief that your inner truth is not enough. Over time, this belief turns into anxiety, people pleasing, chronic overthinking, and emotional exhaustion. You begin to feel watched even when alone, judging yourself through imagined eyes of others. Reclaiming your inner voice starts with noticing where you feel drained. Energy loss is a signal. It often appears when you say yes while something inside you says no, when you stay silent while something in you wants to speak, when you pursue goals that look impressive but feel empty. These moments are invitations, not to react impulsively, but to pause and listen. Listening to yourself does not mean acting on every impulse. It means taking your inner responses seriously. It means asking why a certain path feels heavy, why another fills you with quiet vitality. Over time, patterns emerge. You begin to recognize what belongs to you and what you inherited from fear, family expectations, or social conditioning. Inner alignment is built through small acts of honesty, speaking a truth that feels uncomfortable, admitting when something no longer fits, allowing yourself to disappoint others instead of betraying yourself. These acts strengthen trust between you and your inner world. And trust is essential because without it, the psyche remains divided. When you live in alignment, your decisions may look slower from the outside. You no longer rush to prove, impress, or compete. You move with an inner consent. This changes your relationship with time. You feel less urgency, less pressure to catch up, because you are no longer running away from yourself. The more you align inwardly, the less you need to explain yourself. Justification is a sign of inner doubt. When you know why you are doing something, words become optional. This quiet confidence is not arrogance. It is coherence. Others may not always understand you, but you will understand yourself, and that understanding becomes a form of psychological shelter. Abandoning external approval does not mean you stop caring about others. It means you stop letting their expectations define your worth. When approval is no longer your compass, relationships change. Some will fall away because they were built on the version of you that complied. Others will deepen because they meet the real person beneath the adaptation. Inner alignment also requires patience. The inner voice often asks for changes before you feel ready. It may ask you to let go of roles that once protected you. This can feel like loss, even when it is growth. But every time you honor that request, you strengthen your inner foundation. Happiness emerges not as excitement, but as steadiness. You wake up with less resistance to your own life. You feel present in your actions. Even struggle feels meaningful because it is yours. The psyche thrives when it is lived from the inside out, not managed from the outside in. When you stop abandoning your inner voice, you stop fragmenting your energy. Life becomes simpler, not easier, but more truthful. And truth, even when uncomfortable, restores vitality. External approval may come and go, but inner alignment creates a sense of being at home within yourself. A state where your thoughts, emotions, and actions move in the same direction, where the inner conflict quiets, where your life no longer feels like a performance, but a process unfolding from a center that finally belongs to you. Facing and integrating your shadow begins the moment you stop pretending that you are only what you like about yourself. Every personality is incomplete, and whatever is excluded from conscious identity does not vanish. It sinks. There it gathers energy. The traits you deny, the impulses you judge, the emotions you were told were unacceptable all descend into the unconscious and form what later appears as irrational reactions, self-sabotage, envy, resentment, or sudden guilt that seems to come from nowhere. The shadow is not evil. It is unfinished consciousness. From childhood, you were rewarded for certain behaviors and punished, subtly or directly, for others. Over time, you learned which parts of yourself were allowed to exist openly and which were safer to hide. This survival strategy was once necessary, but what once protected you later confines you. The shadow forms where adaptation replaces authenticity, and the longer it remains unacknowledged, the more power it gains over your life. You can recognize the shadow by observing what triggers you emotionally. Strong reactions are rarely about the present moment alone. When something small provokes disproportionate anger, shame, or contempt, the shadow is nearby. It appears most clearly in projection. You dislike in others what you have not accepted in yourself. The traits you condemn, idealize, or obsess over often belong to your own disowned nature. Ignoring the shadow does not make you virtuous. It makes you unconscious. Moral superiority is often a compensation for inner denial. People who are overly righteous are usually at war with something inside themselves. The shadow demands acknowledgement, not punishment. When it is rejected, it expresses itself indirectly through passive aggression, destructive habits, or repeated life patterns that seem fated, but are actually psychological. Integration does not mean acting out every hidden impulse. It means understanding it. The shadow contains primitive emotions, yes, but also creativity, vitality, assertiveness, and instinctual wisdom. Many people suppress their anger and later wonder why they feel weak. They suppress their ambition and later feel resentful. They suppress their sensuality and later feel numb. What you deny does not disappear, it reappears distorted. To face the shadow, you must be willing to see yourself without romantic filters. This requires humility. It requires admitting that you are capable of contradiction, selfishness, fear, and darkness. This is not a failure of character. It is a condition of being human. The danger lies not in having a shadow, but in being unaware of it. The shadow often reveals itself in moments of shame. Shame marks the boundary between the accepted self and the rejected self. Instead of immediately escaping shame through distraction or justification, staying with it can be instructive. Ask what part of you is being exposed. Ask what truth is trying to surface. This is uncomfortable because it dissolves the illusion of control. As you begin this work, you may feel internal resistance. The ego prefers a stable self-image, even if it is false. Confronting the shadow threatens that image, but the ego that refuses to evolve eventually becomes rigid, and rigidity leads to suffering. Growth requires disintegration of old identities. Integration is a slow process of dialogue between consciousness and what lies beneath it. Writing, reflection, honest self-observation, and symbolic expression allow the shadow to speak without overwhelming you. When you give language to what was once suppressed, it loses its need to erupt destructively. One of the most difficult aspects of shadow work is taking responsibility without self-hatred. Guilt keeps the shadow in place. Awareness dissolves it. You are not asked to condemn yourself for what you find, but to understand how it came to exist. Compassion toward your own darkness makes you less cruel toward the darkness of others. As the shadow becomes conscious, your energy returns. Much of your vitality was tied up in repression. When repression relaxes, life feels fuller. You become less reactive because fewer parts of you are operating autonomously in the dark. Choice replaces compulsion. Relationships change profoundly through this process. You stop demanding perfection from others. You stop unconsciously provoking conflict to externalize your inner struggle. You recognize your projections and withdraw them. This does not make relationships effortless, but it makes them honest. The integrated person is not flawless. They are balanced. They know what they are capable of, and this knowledge makes them more responsible, not less. Awareness creates containment. The shadow that is known becomes a source of strength rather than chaos. When you stop running from the parts of yourself you fear, you stop being chased by them. The inner world becomes quieter, not because conflict disappears, but because it is no longer denied. You gain depth, you gain realism, you gain a grounded confidence that does not depend on appearing good, but on being whole. Releasing false identities begins with noticing how much of your life is lived in response to an imagined audience. From early on, you learned not only how to behave, but how to be seen. You shaped yourself according to praise, criticism, comparison, and fear of rejection. Slowly, this produced a persona that functioned well in the world, but drifted away from your inner reality. The problem is not that this persona exists, but that you mistake it for who you truly are. False identities are built from shoulds. Who you should be by a certain age, how you should appear, what success should look like, how strength or love should be expressed. These expectations do not originate from your inner nature. They are absorbed from culture, family, and survival needs. When you live from them unconsciously, life becomes a performance, and anxiety becomes the cost of maintaining the role. Much of exhaustion comes from trying to uphold an image that no longer fits your inner development. Growth changes you, but false identities resist change. They demand consistency even when the soul is evolving. This creates inner tension. You feel stuck, unmotivated, or numb, not because something is wrong with you, but because something outdated is being forced to continue. Letting go of these identities often feels like losing structure. Roles provided direction, even if they were restrictive. When they dissolve, you may feel uncertainty or emptiness. This is not a sign of failure. It is a transitional state. When the old self loosens its grip, the new self has not yet taken form. One of the clearest signs of a false identity is chronic self-judgment. The inner critic exists to police behavior according to external standards. When those standards lose relevance, the critic becomes harsh and confusing. Instead of guiding you, it paralyzes you. Releasing the false self quiets this inner surveillance. Another sign is living primarily in comparison. When your sense of worth depends on where you stand relative to others, you are not living from your center. Comparison replaces self-knowledge. You chase goals that look meaningful but feel empty once achieved. Satisfaction remains temporary because it was never rooted in your own values. To release false identities, you must allow yourself to disappoint expectations. This is often the most difficult step. You fear losing approval, love, or belonging, but what is lost is usually conditional acceptance tied to the role you played. What emerges is the possibility of being known as you are. Authenticity does not arrive fully formed. It unfolds through experimentation. You try ways of living that feel more honest. Some will fail. Some will feel awkward. This is part of the process. The false self was polished over years. The true self begins raw. As false identities dissolve, your relationship with success changes. You no longer pursue achievement to validate your existence. You choose actions that resonate internally, even if they appear smaller or slower. Meaning replaces image. Fulfillment replaces applause. You may notice resistance from others. When you change, you disrupt the expectations that kept relationships predictable. Some people will attempt to pull you back into your old role. This is not always malicious, it is often unconscious, but returning to an identity that no longer fits will cost you more than their discomfort. Releasing who you think you should be also frees emotional energy. You no longer spend it on self-monitoring, self-correcting, and self-defending. That energy becomes available for creativity, presence, and depth. Life feels less heavy. The most subtle false identity is the idea that you must always be improving yourself. Growth is natural, but compulsive self-optimization hides self-rejection. When you accept yourself as a process rather than a project, striving softens into development. As you release external expectations, you begin to sense an inner orientation. Decisions feel less forced. You move toward what feels internally coherent. This coherence creates quiet confidence, not because you have answers, but because you are no longer pretending. The end of false identity is not the loss of self. It is the return of it. What remains is not dramatic or heroic. It is simple, grounded, and real. You stop living as an idea and begin living as a person, guided less by how things look and more by how they align within you. Taking responsibility for your inner world begins when you realize that not everything you feel is caused by what is happening around you. Events may trigger emotions, but the intensity and persistence of those emotions come from unresolved inner patterns. When you believe your inner state is controlled by circumstances, you surrender your power. Responsibility is not about blaming yourself for pain, but recognizing where your influence truly lies. Many people confuse responsibility with self-criticism. They punish themselves for feeling anxious, angry, or unmotivated. This only deepens the inner conflict. True responsibility is observational. It asks what is happening inside without immediately judging it. When you observe your thoughts and emotions, you create space between awareness and reaction. In that space, choice becomes possible. Your inner world is shaped by habits of thought that have developed over years. Automatic narratives run quietly in the background, interpreting everything that happens to you. If these narratives are unconscious, they dictate your mood and behavior. Becoming responsible means identifying these patterns instead of identifying with them. A thought loses authority when it is seen clearly. Emotional responsibility also involves allowing feelings to exist without acting them out or suppressing them. Emotions are signals, not commands. When you react impulsively, you are ruled by them. When you suppress them, they accumulate and return in distorted ways. Responsibility lies in containment. You let emotions move through awareness without letting them dominate action. One of the most difficult responsibilities is abandoning the role of the victim. This does not mean denying that you have been hurt. It means refusing to build your identity around the injury. The victim identity offers moral comfort but steals agency. As long as your suffering defines you, change feels like betrayal of your own story. Taking responsibility for your inner world requires honesty about what you avoid. Procrastination, distraction, and numbness are not laziness. They are strategies to escape inner discomfort. When you stop judging these behaviors and start understanding what they protect you from, you regain choice. Responsibility also means recognizing that meaning is not given to you. You participate in creating it. When life feels empty, it is often because responsibility has been outsourced. You wait for motivation, inspiration, or permission, but meaning emerges through engagement. You commit before certainty appears. As you assume inner responsibility, your relationship with problems changes. You stop asking why things always happen to you and start asking how you respond to what happens. This shift does not eliminate difficulty, but it prevents unnecessary suffering. You become less reactive and more intentional. Taking responsibility also involves forgiveness, especially toward yourself. Holding on to past mistakes keeps the psyche trapped in repetition. Responsibility is forward, facing. It acknowledges what happened and chooses differently now. Without forgiveness, responsibility turns into punishment. As you become more responsible inwardly, you notice a subtle increase in self-trust. You no longer feel at the mercy of moods or circumstances. Even when emotions fluctuate, there is a stable observer within you. This stability is the foundation of resilience. Happiness grows not from controlling life, but from understanding your inner responses to it. When you take responsibility for your inner world, you stop waiting to be saved. You stop negotiating with reality. You meet life as it is, with awareness rather than resistance. Meaning arises not from perfect conditions, but from the way you hold your experience, the way you choose to respond, and the way you remain present to your own inner life, even when it is uncomfortable.